We are not regarded as equals of the others in the city. They try to make us feel and do everything in their power to ensure that we feel that we are second-rate citizens.
Hello. This is the city of Derry. Its population of 55,000 makes it the second largest in Northern Ireland. This is the city that in the year 1689 withstood a siege of 105 days to protect its Protestant liberties and to keep out the Catholic Irish supporters of King James. The walls and guns used in that siege stand here today, symbols of a city that lives on the memory of those days and prides itself on the watchword, "No surrender." McCauley, I notice certain very clearly defined areas of the city are decked out in red, white and blue bunting with an occasional orange banner thrown in. What's all this in aid of?
Preparing for the annual celebration of the relief of Derry. We live here continually in the atmosphere of the siege. In fact, some people in the city seem to imagine the siege is still on. It has never been raised because we get it to our breakfast, dinner and tea, as the saying is.
I noticed that you and many people here in the north, you use the terms Unionist and Protestant more or less interchangeably and Catholic and Nationalist interchangeably. Is there a clear-cut parallel split in the community here?
Of course there is, because whether the political theorists like it or dislike it, the facts of life are that these descriptions are interchangeable to the extent of 99 all the names you like to mention.
The division of the city into two communities is effective today.
Unfortunately, it is, yes. The community, there is the sense, this is the backwash of Britain's first colonial effort, and by and large, the plantation mentality still prevails. There is the dividing line between the haves and the have-nots, and there is the difficulty of persuading those who have to surrender their position of privilege in the interests of fair play and modern democratic thought.
When James I of England decided that plantation was the only solution for rebellious Ulster, he called the 12 chief trade guilds in London to help in his grand design. Between them, the guilds took over 63% of all the land in County Derry, established the present city, and added the prefix London to Londonderry. When Charles II died in 1685, Protestant England trembled in anticipation because their new king, James, the brother of Charles, was a Catholic. It was widely suspected that James was in league with the Pope in an attempt to roll back the tide of Protestantism. In 1688, James issued a declaration removing the discriminatory laws against Catholics and dissenters. Cartoons showing James's ambassador kissing the foot of the Pope were not calculated to quiet public fears. The attempts by the king to remove the penal laws were strongly resisted by clergy of the Church of England. James foolishly tried coercion, sending 7 bishops to the Tower to await trial. His action raised a popular outcry, and the courts eventually set the bishops free in defiance of the king. The day after the bishops were released, a formal invitation was sent by the Protestant nobility to William of Orange, James's Dutch son-in-law, asking him to lead a rebellion in support of the Protestant cause. William landed in England in November, and James fled to France without striking a blow for his throne. The coronation of William and Mary set the seal on the glorious revolution of 1688. In the meantime, the Lord Deputy of Ireland, Richard Talbot, Duke of Tyrconnell, sought to hold the country for James. A garrison was sent to Derry. The city fathers were prepared to let them in, but at the last moment, some apprentice boys seized the keys and slammed the gates. In March 1689, James landed in Kinsale and marched on Derry, but the city held out against him. Not having the guns to break through the walls, James tried to starve the inhabitants into submission. The defenders suffered greatly from lack of food, but on the 30th of July 1689, the relief ship, the Mountjoy, burst through the barrier across the river and brought in supplies. The siege was over, and James returned to Dublin. Along with the Battle of the Boyne, the closing of Derry's gates has become the most significant event in the folk history of the Protestant community in Northern Ireland. When does this celebration take place?
12th of August, or some date very conveniently near it.
So there's a special 12th for Derry in addition to the 12th of July.
Yes, an annual affair.
And do they have an orange parade here?
Very, yes, they do come from the Prentice Boys organisation, I think they call it. Come from all parts of the 6 counties. They concentrate on Derry for this particular occasion.
And they put on a good show?
We have ever so many demonstrations. They came in Derry. We have the 12th of July, and we have the 18th of December, which is the anniversary of the shutting the gates, a rather smaller affair, and now this 12th of August. So as I say, we live in the atmosphere of the siege from one end of the year to the other, practically.
James Doherty's ancestors came from Donegal to Derry in the last century.
Yes, I'm 5th generation Derry.
I see. And your people must have passed a good deal of the history of Derry through their hands in the last few generations.
Well, presumably since around the end of the 18th century, when they came into Derry from Donegal, they were part and parcel of the changeover of Derry from a plantation town to a town with a nationalist majority, due to the influx of the people from the surrounding Donegal areas, particularly the peninsula of Inishowen.
In origin, Derry is a Protestant plantation town, but it's also the natural port for the surrounding region, including Donegal, which helps to explain how it has become the largely Catholic city it is today. Donegal is picturesque, but much of the countryside is rocky and barren and offers at best a poor livelihood. People might never have chosen to live here if they had not been driven west by the plantations. Various attempts were made in the 19th and 20th centuries to set up cottage industries in Donegal, but by and large there was little work to hold young people. Most of them went to Scotland and England through the port of Derry. Some moved no further than the city itself. With the coming of the welfare state, jobless Catholics found that they could eke out a reasonable existence in Northern Ireland on the dole without being forced to emigrate to mainland Britain. Improved medical services also meant that in the larger Catholic families, more children survived.
You find that old glowering colonial attitude. They are, I speak now particularly of my own city of Derry, they're watching our growing numbers. They are watching to see in what ways they can restrict us, and there's this constant, very hard to describe atmosphere of watchfulness, this sort of business where you must know what the other fella is before you can condition what your attitude is going to be to him.
The nationalist majority is there, but it is not allowed to prevail by the system of electoral boundaries, which has been worked pari passu with the rise of nationalism, of the nationalist people, so as to make sure that they would not have the political effect that their numbers entitled them to.
I understand that at one time the city was in fact ruled by the nationalist majority.
When at the setting up of Northern Ireland, proportional representation was brought in for the protection of minorities, the nationalist majority dominated Derry, and there was in effect a nationalist corporation, which was quickly ended when proportional representation was disposed of for political ends.
Yes. Could you explain to us something about the way the gerrymander works here in Derry?
We have the city carved up into 3 wards. One, the South Ward, into which the Catholic population have been all channelled, by and large. The other 2 the other votes are distributed between 2 wards, the North Ward and the Waterside Ward, giving 2 wards to 1. And the Catholic representation is confined, in fact, to the South Ward. out of which they get 8 seats in the corporation. Between the other two, the Protestants or Unionists, if you like to call them that, get 12, and so they're assured of a permanent majority of 4, no matter how the majority in the register.
In spite of the fact that they comprise 1/3 of the citizens of the city.
Quite. As a matter of fact, the best way to put the whole anomaly is that there are more Catholics in the South Ward alone than there are non-Catholics in the entire city of Derry. It's just about as lopsided as that.
Well, is there any way of breaking a situation like this?
None that we know of. When the last gerrymander was perpetrated, the Catholic Registration Association called for a sworn inquiry, and in spite of the fact that the evidence was perfectly damning against the proposed scheme, when the thing came out cut and dried, it was as I have just described. And so we had shot our last bolt. No, there is no redress in law for it.
In theory, the authority of the Westminster government in Northern Ireland remained unaltered by the establishment of the Stormont Parliament in Belfast. In practice, however, British politicians prefer to forget about Northern Ireland and to get on with their own problems. Harold Wilson, who became British Prime Minister in October 1964, is said to have remarked privately that any politician who wants to get involved with Ulster ought to have his head examined. Preserving Protestant dominance after the setting up of the northern state was clearly difficult in places like Derry, where the nationalist population outnumbered Unionists by 2 to 1. But it was not a problem beyond the wit of the resourceful Ulster Protestant. A system was devised which deprived 250,000 people of the franchise in local elections. Most of those so deprived were Catholics.
Oh yes, in the case of the local government franchise, in addition to deprivation of lodgers of the vote, people in rooms who can't afford houses of their own or have not got them, there's of course the company franchise, which again loads the dice very heavily in the Unionist favour.
How does this work?
Well, by and large, of course, the Unionists own the majority of the registered companies, and the registered companies are given a vote. A certain number of votes according to the number of directors in the company.
I think a lot of the Unionists who are in control quite honestly think that those who pay the majority of rates should control the affairs of the city. They are prepared to neglect the fact that most rates are paid by businesses, and that those businesses draw their incomes from the community at large, from the consuming public, and that therefore the democratic ideal of one man, one vote is also reasonable, even from the point of view of contribution of rates.
Is there any redress for gerrymandering, say, in local electoral areas?
I think not, because we have tried this. We've even lowered ourselves to a petition to the Privy Council in England, and we had the strange phenomenon that the matter was referred back to the guilty parties, the guilty men of Stormont themselves. I'm afraid that there is no normal redress for this problem, that it will take a blast of public inquiry and of informed public opinion in order to sweep away this rotten system.
The songs of Protestant victories play on Derry's walls and echo around the Catholic bogside below. Beneath the walls, unemployment and poor housing are endemic. Gerrymander and disfranchisement in local elections are of particular concern to Catholics because of their general belief that Unionist councils give jobs and houses mainly to their own supporters.
Friel, you're a Derry man, born and bred.
That's right.
Paddy Friel, schoolmaster and father of the playwright Brian Friel.
You must, as a teacher here in Derry, you must have put a great many boys through your hands.
Well, possibly many thousands. Many thousands.
Where are most of them now?
Well, I should say that the majority might be in England. The remainder, I suppose, scattered
Has it been your experience that your students have been able to get a fair crack of the whips?
Oh, they never do. They never do.
And in particular, in the civic administration of the city, how does this arise?
Well, the very fact that they are Catholics is sufficient to debar them from employment in the corporation.
Yes. Does the corporation employ a great many people?
It does, yes. I couldn't tell you right off the number, but those in any employment worthwhile in the corporation are certainly non-Catholics.
I've heard, since I've been here, a rather peculiar fact, and that is that the Guildhall, which is the centre of the corporation's activities here in the city, is exclusively a unionist employer. Is this so?
That is quite correct. There's not even a Catholic cleaner employed in the Guildhall. It's policy to keep Catholics out of the Guildhall itself.
In Derry today, all of the heads of the city council departments are Protestants. Over 80% of salaried employees are Protestant. Catholics are only employed in the more menial jobs and never in the Guildhall. The mayor, Sir John Anderson, declined to be interviewed for the programme.
I rather felt heartbroken in talking to boys who had no other opportunity of earning a livelihood except by leaving Derry and going to England.
What's the normal pattern after a student leaves school here?
Well, he finds on leaving school that the opportunities are very, very limited. He knocks around in dead-end jobs until he's actually tired looking at himself. He's tired with everybody, everybody's tired with him, and the only outlet is get away from here.
The justification for a jobs for Protestants only policy is the argument that Catholics do not give allegiance to the Constitution, will not honour the flag or national anthem, and therefore do not merit any favour from the state. Dr Jim McCabe is a Catholic member of the Hospital Appointments Board in Derry.
Well, when you're a native of Northern Ireland, you find that you get accustomed to these difficulties. But as it happens, I'm a member of the hospital board, and one does occasionally come across difficulties in connection with the work of that hospital management committee.
In Altnagelvin, Derry's bright new hospital, 21 out of the 25 doctors are Protestant. It's said that 2 of the 4 Catholics were selected by mistake. They have Protestant-sounding names.
Well, I think that it could well be construed as being evidence of discrimination, but I think it is wrong to attribute motives to people in their appointments. I don't think we gain anything by complaining that there is discrimination, and I think we'd be quite wrong in assuming that every action that doesn't suit us is based on motives of discrimination.
Yes.
I'm a family man, and I dislike very much this constant striving and fighting. I would prefer to live in peace. I have my family to rear, I have my life to live, and so on. And it's a hateful thing to be fighting with one's neighbour, or to be running down the province in which one lives.
The nationalist minority here are truly nationalist in that they want to see a 32-county republic, presumably.
Most certainly, and they have always voted that way too, and please God, they always will vote that way.
Well, one of the big arguments used by their opposition here is that they'll stand to lose a great deal materially if a 32-county republic were to come about.
They may have their privileged wings clipped a very, very little bit, but I can assure them and assure anybody who is interested in the truth that there will be no night of the long knives following the day when Catholics receive their proper place in this community, or on the day in which there's a united Ireland.
After jobs, the other area where control of votes is important is in housing. Discrimination is alleged to be practiced in 3 ways. Protestants are housed before Catholics, Protestants are given larger and better houses for the same rent. Catholics are refused housing in areas such as Belmont, where they might dilute the Protestant vote and threaten the gerrymander. Some of the Catholic housing certainly leaves much to be desired. This is Springtown Camp, once a wartime army base and now, 20 years later, a Catholic housing estate. Nobody wants to live here, but there is nothing better. The council is said to be actually reducing its housing programme rather than let Catholics spill over the boundaries of the crowded South Ward into Protestant territory.
One sometimes gets the impression that the difficulties are exaggerated. For instance, in the Sentinel, the Derry Unionist Weekly recently, they quoted a figure which showed that 2/3 of the houses allocated in Derry City since the war have gone to the Catholic community, which comprise 2/3 of the population of the city. Now, the claim is often made that housing discrimination is exercised in Derry. Do these facts counter that to any extent?
Well, I've heard this sort of defence before. To translate those facts, I must remind you that it is our people who are the have-nots in the north and in Derry City in particular, and it is true that we have got a greater proportion of the houses, but that is because we are about 95% of the people who need them. And the simple truth at this moment is that there are no unsatisfied Protestant housing applications, whereas we have a backlog of no less than 2,000 who are still desperately in need of houses.
So the fact is that people are not really allocated houses on need, but rather on affiliation.
They are allocated purely on the basis of political expediency, I regret to say, and you have the well-publicised phenomenon of a couple who had only set their wedding date being awarded a house, whereas I have people of my own faith who are waiting no less than 18 years for houses.
Yes.
These facts have been put up officially very often to the minister at Stormont. He simply does the Pontius Pilate, washes his hands of the whole thing, say this is a matter for the local authority.
The upholders of law and order keep a wary eye out for anyone who might disrupt the festivities. Police in Northern Ireland are overwhelmingly Protestant and are viewed by Catholics as the paramilitary arm of a Protestant state. In an exclusively Protestant state, the ceremony and marches would be an occasion expressing communal solidarity, much like Independence Day in America or Remembrance Day in Britain. But in a city like Derry, where Protestants are in a minority, Catholics feel the marches are intended to be an annual reminder of who won and who lost in 1689, and who intend to stay winning.
Well, of course, this intense, almost pathological concentration on an event of so long ago, it's out of all historical perspective and proportion. It just doesn't make sense in 1964. But you must remember all this Williamite war business, it serves as a mythology for the whole Orange movement. It provides the mythology. About the Orange movement, I might say that there's been considerable discussion in the ranks as to whether it's essentially and primarily a religious or a political organisation. Seems to me that the best answer is that's rather a substitute for religion. Mm-hmm. And all this regalia and banners and all there, the equivalent of a liturgy, so to speak. That's how it is.
One sometimes hear that round about the month of July each year that the
Mad Month.
The Mad Month, as you call it, the Unionist majority go into a month of spiritual renewal. Does this have any effect on relations between the communities?
I doubt very well whether you could call it a spiritual renewal, because it's a sort of a drum-drugged ecstasy that they get into at that particular time, in which they see the Pope of Rome and Belfast Celtic and Mr. De Valera and all the vague fears that were in, they're all rolled together and they become very, very real at that time. Mm-hmm. I would be big and admit that there is a fear in their minds which is real to them and which will have to be overcome if there ever is to be any living together of the two sections of the community here.
all this must lead to a great deal of bitterness between the two communities here.
We have got so used to it that we've just got to grin and bear and shrug our shoulders as best we may, and we just have got to live with it, as we regard as one of the unpleasant facts of life in this place, and we try nevertheless to knock out as pleasant existence as we can in spite of all these drawbacks.
What, for instance, is it like to be a Catholic here?
For my part, I must say it's great to be a Catholic here, because I like a bit of salt with my meat, and I think, if I may whisper it gently to a southerner, a little bit of opposition, a little bit of persecution doesn't do any harm to our faith. Mm-hmm. And up here you have that sense of competition and having to strive and so on for your position in the community, and I think that adds a certain savour to life here.
Pope John XXIII died in 1963. During his short reign, he had done much to sweep away some of the more bigoted attitudes and practices in the Catholic Church. Ecumenism, invented by liberal Protestants, became permissible also for Catholics.
Definitely within recent times there has been a very, very noticeable slackening of tension. And I wouldn't exactly call it a wind of change, but certainly a considerable breeze of change. And for that, I think we are indebted to the memory of the late Pope John, whose influence was phenomenal altogether. You had Protestants in this city of terrible tensions in the past, deeply moved at the death of that wonderful Pope. There's no question or doubt at all about it that he debunked the old Protestant image or caricature of the Pope as some conspirator, deep-dyed conspirator, and that's abolished.
It's a strange and a very difficult thing to try to explain to an uninformed stranger. You have that sort of oil and water sense here, that the two elements in the community are mixed together, but they're not really mixed. They're not part of the same community. And it is an ugly thing that I have to report now, that you have to know what a person is. If the door opens and a stranger comes into a crowded room, you must know what that man is. There's a moment of silence always, and the question that springs into everybody's mind, and I've tried this in my own people who are so used to it that perhaps they haven't noticed it, and the question is, what is he? Now that's altogether a non-natural thing, and we don't want to be living in those kind of conditions. We want an end of that too.
Would it pay to encourage greater social mixing between the two communities, break this kind of thing down?
Yes, it would, but that's easier said than done. We want to see more mixing, but we want to see rather a lessening of mistrust. After that, yes. I don't think you can weld these two things together, these two elements together too suddenly. It'll have to be a growth from the grassroots, as the saying goes.
Captain Terence O'Neill, Prime Minister of the Stormont government, was educated in England, away from the sectarian animosities of Northern Ireland. Since his appointment in March 1963, he has begun to persuade the Protestant population that they must share power with their Catholic neighbours or rue the consequences. But in the end, the extension of educational equality to Northern Ireland from Britain may be the critical factor in forcing change, rather than any magnanimity from the Unionist side.
Well, there of course is the hardcore that I dare say the die-hard hardcore will never change their ways, but I do believe that amongst the non-Catholic community there's growing up a younger and rather more educated class who are getting rather sick, sore and tired of much of the old shibboleths and of other distractions. And I think that the extension of education through the 11 plus system has probably helped.
There is concurrently an improvement in educational facilities, yes, on a democratic level, which is making it patently obvious that the nationalist community has the potential to enter in the fullest means into every sphere of economic and political activity which were hitherto regarded as the preserve of what were regarded as the hard-headed, thrifty and prudent unionist businessmen and administrators.
So that there's not alone a great deal for the nationalist community to gain in the future, but also to contribute.
The nationalist community is in a position to contribute to the well-being of this northern section of our country and the northwest section in particular, and I think that contribution will be of intrinsic value and holds out great hope for the ultimate reunification of our country.
Mr. Friel, do you think any wind of change is coming to Derry? Is equality of job opportunity going to come within the near future, do you think?
Well, there is a wind of change in that we seem to be getting along ever so much happier now than we did some years back. But that wind of change doesn't necessarily mean that there's a change of outlook, a change of attitude on the part of those who differ from us. The wind of change would mean that all the concessions to make it worthwhile would have to come from us.
And that you get very little you expect in return.
We get nothing in return. Nothing in return.
Mr. McAteer, does your side up here ever feel misunderstood in the South?
We're accustomed to being misunderstood everywhere, north and south. But I'm rather glad you mentioned that, because it does seem to me that there's not so much a misunderstanding, perhaps that's too strong a word, but there's a lack of understanding in the south as to what the problem of living in the north is.
Would you say a lack of interest as well as understanding?
No, I just think it's a lack of knowledge. I found in talking to people that they were surprised to find the curious undemocratic tricks that are played on us up here, and they were interested.
Mr. McCauley, I understand that you're vice chairman of the Catholic Registration Association.
That is so.
What exactly does this registration association do here?
Oh, well, the Catholic Registration Association, as its name implies, is strictly non-political. Its purpose has always been simply to ensure that every Catholic entitled to the vote is in fact put on the register. That's its sole purpose. How the Catholic then may exercise the franchise is a matter absolutely for his own conscience. We've made that perfectly clear time and again.
On the political front, is there any likelihood of one side with their political group winning votes from the other side in the visible future?
No, absolutely none at all. It may come. I would like to think that it will come sometime very soon, because I don't like to have my politics based entirely on sectarian divisions. I think that's all altogether wrong. But we must stick to the facts as they are, and those are the facts as they are at the present time.
Does the Labour Party here have any future? It seems to try to straddle sectarian divisions.
Not at all. The Labour Party is simply a beautiful theory. You can have a Labour Party in any place where there's a normal democracy, and I keep on reminding people that you have no normal democracy here.
Where religion is a badge of race, the churches clearly have a key role to play in helping to stamp out racism. Protestants in Derry need to be generous enough to share power with their Catholic brethren if the present tensions in the community are to be defused. Some politicians are beginning to show the way, but churchmen also need to give good example. An imaginative break with the past is needed if there is to be any future for the young people of Northern Ireland today.
Can you see any final solution to these apparently insoluble problems?
I'm neither a prophet nor the son of a prophet, and it's particularly dangerous to be a prophet in this country. But it has been said that Ireland is the country where the unexpected always happens and the expected never. We can only hope and pray that that will be true in this case. I have a feeling personally that if and when the question is solved, it will not be solved in the sense of a victory for any one side over the other, but rather by a fusion of interests. Through the pressure of world events, tendencies of the times and the other influences that I have referred to. Such is my hope at any rate. It may not be in my time, but the Irish people, after all, had to wait 700 years for what measure of freedom they got in another part of the country, and they're good winners. They can well afford to wait.
Officially, the Siege of Derry ended on the 12th of August, 1689. In fact, the Siege of Derry is still in progress. The walls which keep the Catholics at bay nowadays are no longer walls of bricks and mortar, but real walls nevertheless. They are walls of prejudice and discrimination and mutual suspicion. Are there signs of breaches in these defences? Is the atmosphere becoming a little less tense? Will the growing numerical superiority and economic strength and educational opportunities of the Catholic community soon make a vital breach? It seems to be only a matter of time. Good night.